Climate Center in New York, and now I turn to Ms. Angelina Nyajima, Executive Director of Hope Restoration in South Sudan. She will join us virtually. Ms. Nyajima, thank you first of all for joining us virtually. How are climate-related disasters and the adverse effects of climate change affecting people, especially women and girls, in South Sudan? What are some of your recommendations for concrete actions that are needed to support adaptation and resilience on the front lines of climate change in South Sudan and elsewhere? Please.
Thank you, Ambassador, for the opportunity. The improvement of the management and conservative of protected areas and other ecosystem areas is one of the priority actions identified in National Adaptation Plan in most countries. The international adaptation finance flows to developing countries is 5 to 10 times below estimated needs, and the gaps continue to widen, where it reached 29 billion in 2020, as reported by donor countries, an increase of 4% from 2019, and this can be raised further by inclusion of humanitarian system into financing food. Combined adaptation and mitigation finance flows in 2020 fell at least 17 billion, short of 100 billion paid to developing countries. It is imperative to underscore the fact that the climate crisis is exacerbating humanitarian needs within many countries, and traditional humanitarian funding cannot keep up with these increasing needs. Hence, there's more financing which is proactive and flexible is needed. In South Sudan, for instance, climate change is among the greatest challenges of our time, representing a particular pernicious threat to the people of South Sudan. The prevalence of poverty. There's also a low level of education and persistent food insecurity. This leaves South Sudan and her people extremely vulnerable to the physical processes and impact of climate change. Up to 95% of South Sudanese depend on climate-sensitive sectors. These include agriculture, forestry resources, and fisheries for their livestock. The massive flooding for the last 4 years has resulted in the death and displacement of more than 280,000 people. Alongside cutting off accessibility, increased waterborne diseases. And the prevalence of waterborne diseases, this wash away houses leading to displacement and damage of crops and farmland. If this is left unaddressed, it could undo the hard-fought gains South Sudan has achieved in terms of building peace and unity. Now, the local partners, mostly national organizations and civil society, has also contributed. South Sudan continues to be challenged by climate change, drought and floods, and little contribution to global warming. But in reality, South Sudan is one of the countries that is affected. This results to displacement of large population, compounding of vulnerabilities, disruption of social support system, thus creating a need for adaptation and agility by humanitarian and development actors. Hope Restoration South Sudan, in coordination with other national and international humanitarian actors, have come up together to form Start Network Hub South Sudan, with the vision of system change to tackle the deep-rooted issues in humanitarian response in South Sudan, including impact of climate change, such as flooding, by drawing on disaster risk financing systems that have been built with local actors. Hope Restoration work with various components of vulnerable population, including IDPs displaced by flood, refugees returnees, including those coming from Sudan owing to the current crisis, particularly women and girls. In Unity State alone, for instance, there has been massive displacement of population, where flood-affected population IDPs have been forced to live in camps away from their ancestral land. Fortunately, with support by UNHCR and Rapid Response Fund, managed by IOM, Hope Restoration has been implementing response to the flood-affected and conflict people through provision of core relief items, provision of temporary and transitional shelters, cash assistance, training on various income-generating activities, such as farming, making of energy-efficient stove to avoid women to walk distance, and also creating community awareness on climate change. Hope Restoration has therefore been involved in climate change adaptation and mitigation activities in humanitarian work. In line with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which acknowledges the role of civil society in the areas of education, training, and public awareness related to climate change. Civil society in South Sudan are very powerful agents of change through public awareness creation, policy research and analysis, and advocacy on key socio-economic issues, including climate change. Similarly, Hope Restoration do this by undertaking vulnerability assessment, baseline studies and research, advocacy, capacity building and awareness creation, policy development and promotion of good governance, information sharing, gender mainstreaming in climate change, monitoring and early warning system, livelihood support and efficient use of energy and humanitarian system, and promotion of use of indigenous knowledge. This informed by the fact that local and national actors best fit and understand the local context which they work and live as well, the needs of communities they serve too. This is very powerful knowledge that can be utilized to strengthen humanitarian action to create more coordinated and locally led humanitarian response, build resilience and act in anticipated crisis. Now, what is the lesson that we've learned with the 4 years crisis in this country? Well, climate change impact on agriculture is directly linked to food security and livelihood, where women and girls are mostly affected because these are the people being burdened to go and look for firewood and food. In a nutshell, the affected population ends up facing marriage and of risk and challenge, including women and girls traveling long distance during droughts and flood in search of resources such as firewood, water. Along the way, these women get raped, others get killed, some are also being kidnapped, or others are being beaten by the reptiles or wild animals. This leads to their death. They have also lost their sources of livelihood, such as crops and livestock, alongside extensive infrastructure damage to roads and bridges, making it difficult for humanitarian intervention to the flood-affected and natural calamities because humanitarian could not access once the roads are cut off. It becomes difficult to respond. The climate crisis double with existing challenges in the country, such as conflicts. We also have poverty, high rates of food and energy prices in the market. So all this make the level of hunger very high. Now, we have some recommendations from the civil society. First, we needed humanitarian and government to work together and understand increasing frequencies of devastating natural and climate risks or disasters that we are within. One, agencies need to have more agile and avoid strict or rigid program response or development. Also, they need to engage national organizations to support and help them play major roles, given the agility and local knowledge for this ability to support resilient building. We also need protection, especially for women and girls, because these are the key and majority affected. They tend to be so vulnerable during conflicts or during disasters. There is need to build the capacity of government institutions at all levels of the resilient programming and climate adaptation. There's also need for increased investment as part of climate change mitigation initiative, with an aim to increase and accelerate agricultural and food system innovation in support of climate action. There's also need to evaluate SNAPs after every 5 years. This is to assess the effectiveness and incorporate revised climate scenarios. Implementation lesson learned. Also, we need to see the resilience of communities should be built through community-based flood early warning system, because most of the flood happen the communities are not aware of. Promote awareness on climate change impact and the water sector, including promoting public awareness on water conservation. Undertake climate vulnerability and risk assessment on ecosystem and private guidance on relevant adaptation actions. Design appropriate measures for surveillance and monitoring of climate change-related diseases in order to enhance early warning system, which include enhancing existing database on health sectors indicators, among others. Conduct an assessment of whether existing and planned infrastructure assets are compatible with a low carbon climate resilient economy. Also improve the policy, legal, regulatory, and institution framework to increase the resilience of important ecosystem. Increasing awareness about ecosystem-based adaptation and its benefit for sustainable development by providing sustainable livelihood options. A strong political will is key. This is to increase adaptation investment and outcome to support and avoid the adaptation gap from widening. There is also need for a comprehensive framework for building resilience across all segments of the society, which is to mainstream adaptation planning within South Sudan, development planning across different government, line ministries, and climate resilient communities, and ensure climate-centric development for long-term resilience and interruption of the poverty cycle. What's the way forward after this? First, due to climate change, there are more frequent and extreme weather-related hazards. Yet there's still possibility to forecast, anticipate, and model many climate risks. This means that it is possible to act early and in advance before the full impact of hazards are felt, to protect more people, and also scaling up pre-arranged financing allow it to be used during a more flexible and anticipatory manner. Second, since adaptation has been financed through various mechanisms and though the action have not become adaptation, the action have enhanced resilience to climate action. There is need to enable access to adaptation fund by humanitarian actors and create a centralized system of tracking climate finance so that the amount of finance that has gone into adaptation can be estimated. Third, similarly, localization of response by establishing mechanisms to help local humanitarian actors, including national NGOs, to have access to the various existing components of climate fund financing. This includes the green climate funds and improve coordination and reporting on adaptation activities. Thank you for the opportunity.
We thank Ms. Angelina Nyajima, Executive Director of Hope Restoration in South Sudan, for her remarks, and I now open the floor for comments or questions regarding the presentations we have just heard. Delegations wishing to request the floor should indicate. Thank you very much, and now Angelina Nyajima, please, virtually.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. I think most of the colleagues have captured the issues of coordination. Indeed, much of the crisis we face is sometimes when coordination didn't go right, we found ourselves in crisis. So we try to look at it, what is it that we can do better to reduce the kind of climate crisis we are in? And I think it should be contextualized in terms of each country, case by case, because what South Sudan faces might not be what maybe Kenya, Uganda, and other countries are facing. So how do we also have coordination, not only for the humanitarian response, but also look into what the country itself are doing, because we need to have such efforts in terms of speaking one language when we are responding to these natural calamities. And also we look into, do we have investment towards such issues, toward climate crisis or climate change in terms of funding? Because when you try to look at it, what comes to the global north, it becomes extremely narrow, but when you look at these countries, barely they don't have much contribution to the global crisis, but then the climate change doesn't spare them in any way. So how do we also take advantage of the local partners on the ground who works closely with the communities? And also how are we becoming like community centric? Because at times I have a feeling the voices of community has been extremely not put into practice. And I like the initiative, the flagship initiative that South Sudan is going to benefit as part of it, where it has to be community driven. Much of the response are going to be community driven. So I believe with this, it will be far much better response in terms of services delivery and also moving away from the system where we are already in, because things are extremely not in the right direction. And I agree with the colleague that said, when you look at COP28 and what we are discussing, sometimes we feel they're almost parallel. Yes, it's parallel, but then we also need to know what can be the communality that we can buy in and maybe benefit from there. To at least next time when we sit during this ECOSOC meeting, we would have said ABC recommendations that were raised have been achieved, and this is the pending recommendation that we need to work toward. Because sometimes it's extremely not very okay, particularly for us civil society, when issues are raised and come next year again, you have the same issues, none has been touched. And next meeting, hopefully, there should be more civil society participation in the events like this, because we are the one on the grassroots, and there's a lot of maybe knowledge, particularly from the local grassroots, that can be beneficial to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like at this point to thank all the panelists for their contributions.